I'm Mitch Hagney. I operate a hydroponic farm in San Antonio called LocalSprout. We have a bunch of different growing configurations where we grow in greenhouses as well as in different container units and on-site at restaurants and residences. We utilize zip grow towers, NFT systems, we've grown deep water culture systems, and we even build in soil with drip line irrigation. And San Antonio has been a really good place for us to grow. There's a lot of demand and there's a lot of real serious interest. So there's a couple different things involved with siting your farm. Among those include specific building permits, which change from city to city. You're going to need certain architects and certain city planners in order to sign off on what your area is and what you're allowed to do with the space itself. But what I have more experience in and what is a little bit easier to figure out is zoning issues. Now, each city's zoning law is different. Close to San Antonio, Houston has zero zoning. Certain cities just decide that they want to do away with it entirely, but the vast majority of cities in the United States are going to have some zoning law. And there are a huge array of what different cities offer as categories for those zoning, including residential, commercial, industrial, agricultural, and then something special called an infill development zone, which can be used for all sorts of different purposes. But what most of the distinction comes in terms of agricultural use is not agriculturally zoned stuff, because most of us are growing things in cities, or at least in places where agriculture isn't normally happening. The primary distinction is industrial, commercial, and residential. And it's not just where you're allowed to grow, it's also where you're allowed to sell your produce. So certain places don't allow you to sell on-site where you grow, certain places encourage it, certain places don't want you to move it from place to place, and all of that changes based on what city or municipality you're in. In San Antonio, like a lot of other cities, because this is a new movement and new technologies, there was a total legal gray zone in terms of where you were allowed to grow crops, and if it was even legal to do urban farming as a commercial enterprise itself, and certainly where you're allowed to sell also was not in the books. So when I and a group of other urban farmers from the community were looking at those laws, we realized that city code needed to be updated, and it needed to be updated in the direction that we wanted it to. In other cities where the farmers haven't been proactive in terms of changing policy, where they just decided to do what they want and then hope that the policy followed, oftentimes there's retroactive policies that change that are detrimental. So the compost smell will not go well, or neighbors don't want commercial activity in the residential area. And so when there is reactive policy making, usually it's not the best for farmers. But when you're approaching it initially, there's enough support that you can probably change things. So in San Antonio, we decided to try to legislate before urban farming became very large. And the way that we did that is different than the way that a lot of other cities chose to do it. In Chicago, for example, there's an urban agriculture ordinance where all things involved in urban ag were changed with a single policy that went through the city council. For us, instead of changing livestock at the same time they were changing zoning, at the same time they were changing other laws, we decided to wait for a comprehensive city review process where they were already planning on changing zoning law. We got a bunch of different stakeholders involved, many of which were unusual for the choices, including Metro Health in our city and the San Antonio Housing Authority. All of those came on as stakeholders that were interested in health or gardening, but wouldn't normally be involved in that specific commercial farming application. But because they had experience in zoning, they were good partners to come on in order to change that policy. Once we had kind of consensus for what the language was going to look like, we decided to submit definitions for 3 different types of production facilities. One we called a residential market garden, and that is where people are living, they're welcome to grow and then sell on that same property. The second is outdoor urban farms, and those ended up having a small restriction for certain residential areas where they may be allowed in those areas, but a special use permit was going to have to be delivered, and that was a compromise that we had to end up making. And then the third one, which is the one that we were most excited about, is all indoor agriculture is now legal in all parts of the city regardless of the zone. And changing the sales opportunity as well as the production location, those were all important, and I think San Antonio's example can probably be used elsewhere in the city or in the country. If I was to approach legislating changes for other cities, what I would want to keep in mind is think about stakeholders that are particularly invested in or have experience in the type of policy that you're changing. So if you're changing zoning, look for organizations that have changed in the past, probably progressive ones that have interest in health, and then build relationships with your councilmen or aldermen, and then come up with language that the community has consensus on, and once all those things happen, it's very, very difficult for any of the opponents to end up creating enough roadblocks to stop the political change process. And generally, the city government wants compliance. They want you to be able to do what you want. Gardening is pretty harmless, so you shouldn't have a huge amount of problems. You just need to put enough momentum in order to make sure that all of the council people or voters end up making the right choice without any risk or rumors of a backlash. Broadly, some of the best advice that I've gotten in terms of how to approach business opportunities in this industry and other ones is, as your business grows, you'll notice things get progressively easier. If things get harder all the time, you're not going in the right direction. So LocalSprout has found a couple different sources of revenue that aren't directly related to farming and selling itself. Now, I am a full-time urban farmer. This is the vast majority of what I do, but we use our space for other revenue sources, and we have the opportunity to build out gardens on site at restaurants and residences to produce revenue in ways that are distinct from normal farming. So if you don't have sufficient scale in order to build out great revenue generation, great ROI, in order to compensate for really, really large capital investments, a good way to build kind of cumulative revenue that you can use to organically develop your business is to look for business opportunities that are unrelated to the actual sale of plants. The community and the interest is so large in urban agriculture that there's a tremendous amount of revenue generation potential that isn't directly related to eating or selling food itself. And that includes selling experiences, selling knowledge, selling ambiance in each of the places where people are passionate about that type of thing.